I'd like to take another look at outsiderness. I've always felt outside of the norms of any group, of my own family, even. And that's pretty much been a constant since I was a child. I was a middle child, and the three older ones were too old to include me in their games and so on, and the two younger ones were kind of babies. And in school, it was kind of impossible for me to join groups. And not that I didn't get invitations, it just didn't. It didn't seem possible. I'm not even sure why. Um, in American society, especially in Texas in the 50s, I I just felt um, very much like an outsider. I read a book in the 50s by Colin Wilson called The Outsider, and I really did identify with it. And he pointed out that there is a certain psychological type, usually artists, writers, poets, people like that, mystics, who are outside of their societies because they are interested in beauty, in ideas, in inspiration, in um, God, in all kinds of things that the world is not very interested in. The world usually is charging ahead to make a living and do what it does. And if you're one of those people who just automatically know you're not going to be able to go down the usual track, you just feel like an outsider, whether you are an outsider or not. One time when we were living in France, a couple came to stay with us from Austin, and his family came from Italy when in the early 1900s, I think, grandparents. And he wanted to go back. His wife was not Italian, but anyway, they had spent some time in Italy with his relatives, and then they came by to stay with us for a while. And she just mentioned one night at supper that I could not possibly speak French as well as I pretended to. And I was kind of taken aback at that. And I just said that the tests I had taken placed me in the 98th percentile of native speakers, not just fluent, but native. The people in that part of France, we were in the east, in the Franche-Comté, um, did identify an accent, but they assumed it was French. I had learned French by speaking French every day, all day, for 10 years with a partner that had grown up in Brittany. But living in Paris, I'm sure I picked up some different accents and pronunciations also. So I can see why it would be a little bit hard to place me. Um, I started thinking about that outsiderness. And I have to say that although I did always feel like an outsider growing up in Texas and living in the States wherever I lived, um, I didn't feel as much of an outsider in France. I I don't know exactly why. And I never tried to hide the fact that I was not French and that I was American. And so it wasn't that. It's just that I liked that way of life. And especially in the last 20 years we were there, where we were in a small village, there was a real sense of community. And in that village that had less than 150 people in it, I'd say a third of the population were not French. They were from everywhere. They were from Switzerland, they were from Italy, they were from Holland, they were even from Russia, they were from Poland, they were from England and Ireland and just all over the map. And we had a real sense of community. And I really did enjoy that. Now, in that experience, I did not feel like an outsider. That's probably the one time in my life I have not felt like an outsider. So when I say that I feel like an outsider, it strikes me as curious, to put it one way. When somebody says, I'm sure you're not the outsider you pretend to be. And that happened like last week um, here on YouTube. And I don't actually pretend to be an outsider. I'm just saying that's the way I feel. But I do have to admit, it applies to the culture I grew up in. It applies to Texas, very much so, but it applies to the rest of the US. If I'm living in a place like I am right now in Mexico, where there are a lot of people from other places in the world, I start to feel more at ease. I start to feel less like an outsider. So I'm not really sure how that works. I'm not really sure what would qualify me as a true outsider or a fake outsider. But in any case, when I say that I am an outsider and I've always been an outsider, I'm just talking about how I feel. Um, I don't even know if there is a hard definition that that I could either meet or not meet. I don't know how that works, but when I say I feel like an outsider, I'm not pretending to be an outsider. I'm just saying that's how I feel. And I have a right to feel that way. But once I sit down and think about it, I don't always feel that way. There are places in the world where I feel like I am a normal part of humanity there and nothing unusual. There is a certain kind of person who just can't live in the place they grew up. And I don't know how that works or why it works that way, but there are people who just have to go to some other place where they do feel at home. And that's me. That's my situation. That's really all I wanted to say about that.